It's good to see some new folks here. Thanks for coming. Or at least I haven't seen you on a call yet. I guess I haven't been on all of the calls. And we'll give just a couple more minutes and see if anybody else is hopping on.
I think it was about exactly a year ago we had that lovely few days at Kirkridge.
Yeah.
You were there. Jean was there.
Yep.
I was there.
Aside from the worst trip ever back from New York City to Toronto, that was a great event.
Well, we'll hope to welcome you all back soon.
I hope so.
Or later, whenever it's safe.
Yeah.
Arlene and Oren, if you guys want to introduce yourselves in the chat box, we're going to use that as a way of intros versus going around because we've got some timely stuff that needs to happen the first part of the meeting today. Good to see you guys. All right, I think I will go ahead and get started. And Ben, maybe as you notice new people coming in, if you wouldn't mind prompting them with the chat to introduce themselves, that would be great. And for anybody who popped on and didn't see that message, if you could introduce yourself in the chat, that would be wonderful. You can include a link to your center if you would like. It's good to see everyone, and it's good to see some folks who are new to me. I'm Kirstin, Vander Giessen-Reitsma, and I work at GilChrist Retreat Center, which is in Three Rivers, Michigan, a small rural city in Southwest Michigan. And GilChrist is owned and operated by the Fetzer Institute. So we're part of a larger organization and also part of a neighborhood of retreat centers. The Hermitage Community, which has had some folks on these calls, St. Gregory's Abbey, which is an Episcopal Benedictine monastery, Apple Farm Community, which is a Jungian community. So we've got kind of a unique spot here in Three Rivers, and have been very thankful during this strange time to be part of that local neighborhood network of centers, but also this retreat center collaboration, which I hear folks on these calls saying over and over again has been such a huge support for them. And if you're, I think the folks I'm seeing for the first time, it looks like you're at least from centers where you've had a participant from your center participating in the retreat center collaboration before. But if you do happen to be brand new to this or you have any questions, Ben Scott Brandt, who you see on the call here, is our coordinator for the collaboration and would be happy to answer any questions you might have, especially if you're wanting to get more deeply involved in some way. There are a bunch of different ways to plug in. And these community calls are just one of those ways. Getting together virtually, seeing each other's faces, sharing wisdom and information and lament and hopes and all of those things, that has been a crucial gift that this community has offered to all of us, especially now. Our theme today is going to be local community partnerships that we are working on or thinking about or learning about during this time of pandemic. The structure is basically going to be, I'll do a short reflective opening, and then we're going to hear from Michael Shewburg from Five Oaks, who has been doing some amazing work to pivot their center during this time. So Michael will have some time to share about that. He has to go for another meeting that starts at 2 o'clock. So hence trying to jump into things pretty quickly. And then I'll share a little bit about what I've been working on with our center here in Three Rivers. And then we'll basically just have some time for open sharing, hopefully about 45 minutes, when we can hear from others who are in the group about things that you're working on, questions that you have, struggles that you have. And then we'll spend about 10 minutes at the end in closing. So with that, Ben, if you wanna, I've got an image and I've got a poem for the opening. So Ben's going to share his screen and put up an image related to this poem. So this is a piece of cut paper artwork by an artist named Molly Costello. I got this from a magazine that we get called G's Magazine. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of G's, but it is a wonderful publication. I look forward to it every quarter. It's an ad-free print magazine, was started by some Adbusters related folks based in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and now it has shifted to Detroit as a headquarters, but it's still very much a bi-national publication. And their fall 2019 issue was on the theme of climate justice. And I thought there was a poem at the end that I thought it was appropriate for this moment for our community of retreat centers. So I will share that to go with the image as our opening. And this poem is by the editor of G's Magazine, whose name is Lydia Wiley Kellerman. I was made for this. I have wept, I have loved, I have knelt and kissed the ground. I have lived through crisis. I have sat with death, and I have survived with new gentleness and strength. My love is, my body is willing. I was made for this. We were made for this. We have held grief circles, cried out from the streets, unlearned and relearned our history, fermented cabbage, grown vegetable gardens, listened to elders' stories, learned to sew, massaged our imaginations, conspired resistance, landed ourselves in jail, nurtured our spirits, gathered song circles, harvested medicinal plants, practiced holistic healing, asked forgiveness, memorized poetry by heart, fixed up bikes, nursed babies, cooked big pots of soup, and looked our fear right in the eye, refusing to be paralyzed. We know there will be risk and cost, vulnerability and solidarity, yet always the sweet grasp of community. Together, we are ready for colonialism to crumble. Together, we are ready for white supremacy to turn to sediment. Together, we are ready for empire to implode. For it is time to systemically let the new ways die, to collectively follow the old whispering ways, to listen to the heartbeat in the trees, to give ourselves to this holy, horrific time, where we are to love this earthly ecosystem without degree, and walk gently, whether it is or would ever have been enough. So I will turn it over to Michael, who for the next, I don't know, however long you have, tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak a little bit about what Five Oaks Center has been up to the past 2 weeks. And I do apologize. I have to leave in 14 minutes. I have a board meeting at 2 o'clock, which has been scheduled for a few months now. So, but I'm really happy to be here and to share a little bit about Five Oaks Center. So just to give what we normally do pre-March 16th is Five Oaks Center is an intercultural interfaith retreat center. So we're offering program opportunities for Muslim, Indigenous, and Christian people to be together, to explore one another's faith traditions, and to find points of meaning and meeting that help us to learn about each other and from each other. Five Oaks started as a United Church of Canada retreat center, lay education training center, founded in the Iona tradition, and so has been pivoting in particular since 2016 around a new identity rooted in interfaith intercultural work. So when March 16th happened, just like it did to all of us on this call, we were forced to be in deep despair and lament and worry about the future of our beloved retreat center. In Five Oaks specific situation, we've been working really hard the last 2.5 years from a point of basically being closed to rebounding to where we were as an organization and not for profit. And so it was pretty heartbreaking to see the potential. We laid off a lot of staff immediately, and we just thought that was it. In Canada, and hello to my Canadian brothers and sisters on the call, but federal, provincial, and local government levels had put out sort of a call to action just to sort of say, if you're a business and you have something you can offer that will help us in this time of pandemic, please write to us and let us know. So, we had clothing companies writing and saying we can make gowns, and we had plastic companies making face shields. And Five Oaks wrote and said, we have this retreat center space and we would love to put it forward to care for, at first we thought healthcare workers, what a beautiful space for potentially folks that have come in contact with COVID to come and have their 14-day isolation, that we could really care for people, that we could put forward what we normally put forward, which is rest and restoration, hope and healing in a beautiful natural setting, in a very sort of comfy lived-in space. And the local municipality came back and offered the idea of working with migrant workers. About 60,000 migrant workers arrive to Canada each year in the planting and harvest season. The majority of those are in Ontario, and they're all living in what is called bunk houses, which is very tight living quarters, and to maintain the social distancing of a minimum of 6 feet or 2 meters, they needed to obviously find other accommodations. So Five Oaks quickly, we had 7 days basically to pivot, bring back our staff, and basically divide our property up into opportunities for this self-isolation care. So I have an assumption that most of our retreat centers are about bringing people, together, that, some of the work we do is around community building and forming of people, and, the unexpected meeting of people. So our dining room is shaped around, round tables, bring people together. Our gathering spaces have, couches and bringing people together. We have common washrooms so that you encounter your guests in their nightgown as they're going to, you're really intimately seeing each other. And so, that's what we try to do. And this has been about putting people apart. So we've had to reimagine the space of how do we really segregate people so that they can have a safe isolation. So, we built walls, and we moved furniture, and we created outdoor spaces that were marked with caution tape to really show people what was their space, and to really provide a safe environment for them to have, this time of isolation, and also for our volunteers and staff to also know what space they could be a part of and not a part of. So it was a big rethinking of the entire facility. You know, it meant that all of us that had back offices in the organization wouldn't be able to access them for the foreseeable future. So they're all in the isolation zone now. So rethinking what it means to do maintenance and housekeeping, what it means to follow all the proper PPE protocols. So, you know, for us, this is an amazing opportunity. And we started with one farm. We finished our first 14-day cycle with 38 migrant workers from Mexico. So they have moved off of Five Oaks onto their farm on Saturday, and we're welcoming the next group of 27 this Friday. And so we're going to continually do this cycle likely through the summer. We have tentative bookings right now through to August 8th. And we're also currently working with an international student organization that brings high school students to Ontario to study in high schools here. And but they will all need to be quarantined as well. So now we're working with this organization on the potential of a 14-day quarantine for teenagers with their teachers. So I think there's a lot of possibilities within this market, I guess you could call it, and an opportunity for retreat centers to really pivot and expand. And I know it doesn't work for everybody. I know that some of our retreat centers are connected to, you know, housing for senior sisters, and it might not work, you know. But it's really been an opportunity for us, you know, as a religious organization to really live into what is our calling, what is the community calling us to, and what does it mean to be active. And there's been some fringe benefits that have come from this that I didn't expect. So the week before our first guests were arriving, we posted on Facebook that this was happening, and we had 48,000 contacts with that post, which is unbelievable. Like, we normally get like 200, you know, people connecting to it. Over 500 shares, you know, over 5,000 comments, smiley faces or thumbs up and stuff like that on Facebook. And it's actually meant that all of our posts since then have received a huge amount of attention. A lot of media attention has come of this. So I just had an interview this morning with CBC Radio, which is a pretty cool thing up here anyways. So that's a really good opportunity to sort of promote the work of retreat centers. What do we do, in particular Five Oaks, to share that work? So it's been super helpful. It's helped us to draw in donations above what we would normally draw in during this time of year. You know, it's gone up by 4 times actually the amount of donations we would normally receive. So by no means is Five Oaks out of the potential of being in a disaster, but at least it's now prolonged into the fall. That's the time period that we're starting to worry about. You know, what will it look like when there's not a need for isolation care? And how will that be? I think that also this opportunity, this experience of caring for migrant workers is helping us to find our voice a little bit, and currently speaking out a little bit about some of the living conditions that migrant workers face. I've learned a lot about, naively, didn't understand how close proximity these bunkhouses are. The beds are 18 inches apart, bunk beds, 50 people in a dormitory, and very poor conditions on farm. They only leave once a week and limited contact with family back home. And many of the men don't even know where they're going when they get to the airport until they get on the plane and find out, oh, I'm going to Paris, Ontario. Okay. Or could be Nova Scotia or British Columbia. So I think a lot of us in Ontario take for granted, the work of migrant workers and how important it is to our food system and to food security. It's pointing out a lot of racism that exists in our communities, of people that don't understand why, these people are coming to take these jobs. And so it's an opportunity for us to engage in these kind of conversations as a center, to talk about systems and to talk about our position, to stand with people in solidarity. So it's a great opportunity to meet, these guys and have my Spanish isn't that great, but to have some conversation with these guys. And it really has saved Five Oaks for this time being. So I don't know, Kirstin, is there anything else that you wanted me to add to? what we're sharing, or?
Well, we have a few minutes for questions that if folks have any, but one thing that I'm also wondering about is how your staff responded to this possibility in terms of the conversations of getting everybody looking in the same direction on this.
Sure. So, I think like we had laid off 50% of our staff, and literally like we had already made our secondary layoff plans, which included, my hours being reduced down to half time. And literally the next day is when we got our confirmation of the first booking. So it was like that close to the wire. In Canada, they have a federal benefit. So there were some staff that were on this benefit and they were hesitant to come off the benefit to come back to work. So there was some difficult HR conversations there around, well, you don't really have a choice and you need to come back. So some of those staff actually chose to volunteer and to stay on the federal benefit, which is helping our organization out and it's helping them feel more secure. So that's an option. People were really worried about getting COVID, and, so we had to have some really like clear conversations about myth busting, doing a lot of research about, how you can get it, how it is spread, how it's not spread. So a lot of research on the CDC and WHO websites and, federal and provincial websites, consulting with local public health, a lot of talking about the difference between stopping the curve and flattening the curve. And the reality is that flattening the curve means that some of us actually do need to catch COVID, and they hope that those that have, a high immune system and that are under 65 will be the ones. And so there is a reality check there around, that's a hard answer, and it's hard to say to people, you need to come back to work, and it might mean that you might get COVID, and here's everything we're doing as an employer to protect you. So talking about hand washing, hand sanitation, when to wear a mask, when not to wear a mask. We have no access to N95 masks. So all we have is these cute masks that, cute little quilting ladies and ladies in nursing homes are stitching up for us. And they're coming up with all these innovative designs. The newest one is like a little pocket in the front where you can put a coffee filter. So, we're receiving all of this generosity, and just being really careful. We also have divided our staff. A quarter of our staff are working offsite permanently. So they're kind of our backup. So, if I go down with COVID, then they can step in. So really thinking about that. We trained all of our staff in food safety, so that anybody can work in the kitchen now, which is really the most important part of our organization at this point.
And Michael, there's a couple questions in the chat about the logistics of that. How did you provide meals, and what about bathroom sharing?
Yeah, so Joanne, thanks for your question. So all of our meals are takeout, which is not our normal. That was a big shift for us, but literally these workers are not allowed to leave their accommodation or the outdoor zone for 14 days. So we're actually delivering the food to a cooler, which is on a picnic table on the edge of their zone. We're spraying the coolers with alcohol spray before we even touch them with gloved hands, then sanitizing our hands, opening the cooler, placing the food in, which is packaged all in, unfortunately, disposable containers. And then they receive the food and we pick up their garbage once a day. So there's literally no contact with these guests other than if we have to go into the unit to do some sort of emergency repair, like a broken toilet, which in the last round there was none. So that was a really good thing. We're following what our local health unit is saying. So if you're thinking of doing something like this, the first phone call you should make is to your local public health, because what I've learned, we're working with 2 different public health organizations right now. There's different rules for each unit. So we're following the specific rules for each unit. So the bathrooms are shared in our context. Depending, one public health unit says there can be 10 men per toilet, 7 per sink, and 10 per shower. So ours is, that's not what we're following. Ours is much lower than that, but we're providing sanitation and mops and everything. They're required to clean their own areas every day. So that's important to know. Kitty's asking about how are we being paid. So the first thing that we did is we actually called a couple local hotels who were also sort of bidding on this work. And to be honest, we underbid them by $5 a day so that we could be competitive, which meant that we had to adapt our menus. We had to kind of lower our expectation on what food we were offering, and now we have local hotels calling us for advice on what kind of food to do, which is really interesting. And so the farmers are paying us their daily amount for each guest. And then in Canada, there's up to $1,500 per quarantine stay for agricultural sector to harness. So they'll have to reapply for that money back from the federal government. Margaret has a question about how are we cleaning between stays? So that's a really good question. We don't normally do 14-day stays. So we know that, the bedrooms are going to be a little bit more well-loved than normal. We know that, we are going to need to do a little bit of extra cleaning. But if there has been no COVID diagnoses during a stay, then we're cleaning like we would with any other guest. So, we're refreshing the spaces, we're cleaning it as normal. If there was a COVID diagnosis during that period, that guest would have been removed from their accommodation and put into what we had to create was an infirmary. So we changed actually one of our meeting spaces into an infirmary, and they would be placed into that space for a new 14-day period. And we would then leave that bedroom and space they were in totally dormant for a minimum of 24 hours. Most research, and I'm not a doctor, so don't take anything I'm saying about this, read yourself, but most research I've read says the virus can't live longer than 24 hours on any surface. So, we're kind of just sealing it up, leaving it, and then we're going in masked, gloved, and we're sanitizing the crap out of the room, excuse my language. So, and we haven't had, Michelle Gossman, thank you for your question. We haven't had anyone need to enter the infirmary at all. There was no COVID cases in our first 14 days at all, not with staff, volunteers, or guests. So the testing protocol, Doug, you're in Ontario. So obviously this depends state to state, province to province, but in Ontario, they're only testing essential workers right now. So like right now, they're only doing long-term care facilities. So there's no testing available for migrant workers or those doing essential care for migrant workers. I think that this will probably change. I think there's actually a big disaster waiting to happen for on-farm work. We're seeing in Southern Ontario massive outbreaks within migrant workers that have been here for 4 months already. So if you tune into news in Chatham-Kent, which is my hometown actually, there's a huge outbreak within a pepper greenhouse, and there's over 30 migrant workers now ill in that facility. So the close proximity is going to be a major issue, so much so that we've actually had one farm book us until October for 20 workers. So the potential of doing full care right through until the fall is a huge reality. And there are not enough beds in Ontario for all of the workers. So if you're in Ontario, highly recommend looking into this. So I don't know. Any other questions?
Yeah, and Michael, I know you have to get going. You have your contact information on the spreadsheet, right? The collaborative spreadsheet.
And I'm typing my email into the box here now. And I want it to be everybody, not just Oren, everyone. I'm happy to have a Zoom chat one-on-one with anyone. I've done a little bit of consulting with a few other camps and retreat centers to talk through what that looks like. Tatamagouche in Nova Scotia is thinking of doing this. So I'd be happy to talk about that. I'd be happy to share, any resources we've created. I've shared those with Kirstin and others. So I'd be happy to do a chat with your staff if they're nervous to talk to them directly about what we've done. Sometimes it's easier to hear from someone else. So I'm happy to collaborate in any way that's helpful if you're thinking of doing this kind of work. And I have to give a shout out to Oren, who I've already given him some praise and I want to do it again because and in Bolinas in February at our last gathering, he was the one that kind of hinted to this idea. And so I do think there's a lot of potential here for us all.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us, Michael, and for being willing to follow up with folks, and just for the good work that you and your whole staff are doing to continue living out your mission in this new context. It's really quite amazing, and appreciate you blazing the trail for this. So thank you.
My pleasure. And I hope you have a fruitful rest of your time together. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you all again online soon. And I'm sorry that I can't stay for the whole time.
Thanks so much, Michael. We'll see you later.
Take care.
So Michael, in a very short span of time, I feel like he's like light years ahead of where I am and where a lot of us are on this particular issue. But that's what this community is for, to support each other with these questions and the logistics and the creative possibilities for sustaining ourselves during this time as organizations and as businesses, while also continuing to fulfill our missions of hospitality in a contemplative space. So I'll share a little bit about what our conversation has been at GilChrist. We're really just at the beginning of exploring possibilities. I have been part of a county-wide conversation for several weeks. I had put information about our center out to our county emergency coordinator, which is something that for those who are in the U.S., it's usually by county. Sometimes it's divided a bit differently by region. There's an emergency coordinator or emergency management coordinator, or terms like that, who is the point person who's networking local agencies during this time. So that person is a great resource, and also, like Michael said, your local health department. Our local homeless shelter contacted me as a result of that, and we've been in conversation about the possibility of supporting them for what they call decongregating. So all of these situations, like Michael was describing with the migrant workers living in close quarters, that's also true for places like homeless shelters, where even in generously spaced, comfortable homeless shelters, there's still, it's hard to get to the recommended distancing for people to stay safe. Our local shelter, when they need overflow capacity, uses local hotels where they'll pay for housing for up to 2 weeks for individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness. But a lot of our local hotels have closed during this time. They do still have a couple of hotels that they're able to work with. And so our possibility of using GilChrist for this has kind of been just out there as one of the tools they have in their toolbox, while they're also waiting to get a notice of funding that has specific information about what is required for these decongregating accommodations. And that has been slow in coming. I think Thursday morning we have a meeting. I think they finally got the notice of funding. And so I've kind of been feeling like this is a conversation that's going to move slowly until it doesn't, and then it could happen really quickly. So I've been having a lot of conversations with my staff. We have 7 of us who work at GilChrist, and over half of us are in high-risk health categories. So it's been a big conversation, and it's been really important to lay the groundwork for that and to bring all of our fears and concerns out into the light and have collective community conversations about that. And I think in creating that space where all of us can be honest about our resistance and our fears without judgment has been really important, and I think has really served to help soften all of our hearts to the idea, because it's really easy to jump to what could happen and the risks, and especially when we're part of a larger organization where we have a finance office that is engaged in risk management and what if, it's important to think about those things. And I think the more we can work through those and feel prepared, that invites people into the conversation, even if they are carrying a lot of the weight of responsibility for managing that risk, the financial risk, the liability, all of that. Yeah, and our I've also been in communication with our local network of retreat centers, because this opportunity comes with funding. So that's a piece of it too. Our local shelter pays $75 a night for accommodations. And I'm aware that some of our other local retreat centers are independent nonprofit organizations and depend on that kind of funding in a way that we at GilChrist do not. So I'm trying to think about our local network as well and how we can collectively support each other versus just each of us looking out for our own needs. So it might make sense for GilChrist to serve as a space for an organization that needs overflow housing where they can't afford to pay anything, and work with one of the other centers that's depending on that income to partner with the homeless shelter in terms of how we think about the distribution of the revenue opportunities. That's all I'll say about that. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that people might have, even if it's I don't know, because like I said, I feel like I'm really at the beginning of this process. And I also would love to hear from other folks who, if you're exploring possibilities, if you have questions for the group about things, I can put some questions in the chat just as prompts, but I think let's open it up and go wherever anybody wants to go.
Kirstin?
Yeah.
I appreciate how many rethinkings are going on among the group. We really started to dig into the conversation, not about some of the areas you've mentioned this morning, but the very nature of bringing people back into our center in reopening, and everything, every zone, whether it's the bedrooms, the common bathrooms, the modality of serving meals, even our bookstore, every aspect of the building, because it's a unified whole, mitigates against distancing. So I'd love to, I don't want to overtake the conversation. My conundrum is how to even envision any form of reopening, let alone thinking the good thoughts that people are helping deal with people who are needing additional housing. So that's the conundrum that we're dealing with here. And any protocols related to receiving people, protecting them while they're here, protecting our staff, and so forth. So that's my greatest mountain to climb.
Well, and from my limited experience so far, I will say one of the things that I've realized is that even though almost intuitively it feels like there's more of a risk in some way in partnering with a social service agency to bring in folks who are not at all used to retreat. And that's, you know, that's a little bit of the kind of the tension that we're experiencing in this, the part of ourselves that we don't want to look at. One of the things that I have appreciated about exploring these possibilities is realizing that if we, you know, like, for example, Michael, in working with the provincial government to provide this service, has all of this support on top of what their staff has the capacity for. And so that's been part of our conversation with GilChrist, is how do we create a partnership where the experts are doing the management and the work for those kinds of questions that we are not equipped to answer. We are not trained in sanitizing, cleaning in an environment where there are communicable diseases. That's not our expertise. Our expertise is offering a space of hospitality and welcome And we want to continue to do that, and we need other people to come alongside us to do the stuff that we're not experts in. So, I mean, I would say in terms of a facility and a partnership, if there's an opportunity to engage the local health department and people who are trained in those things to say, we're turning this over to you, to me, that's been one of the important aspects to try to discover for one of these potential partnerships, so that we can feel confident in what we do and let folks do what they are confident in.
Thank you.
Yeah, what this conversation is doing for me is building confidence in, we've been exploring what it is to hold respite and restoration for first responders. And so we have some of our board members are part of working with the University of Washington Medical, part of working with the local government who's coordinating with Governor Inslee here. And it's been the fears of how do we protect the health of our team. We're embedded on the south end of an island where the median age is 58. So half of the population of our local community is a high risk factor. And that we currently have, we've currently established that there are only a few cases remaining on the south end of the island. And so we've been navigating what is our responsibility to our local community, who are all high risk. And so what this is doing for me is building the confidence for exploring more explicitly how we hold those first responders for that respite and restoration and trauma, really nurturing and trauma response. And so with what Michael named, is like, what is your calling? What is your particular, what is the work that would particularly fit your, your context and your purpose? So we have a team meeting May 16th, a day retreat, where we're more explicitly be exploring, what do we do in this interim period that really meets our purpose, our mission, and what we can do safely. So I'm super grateful for the confidence building that this is right now.
I'm curious if anybody else is exploring specific opportunities. Does anybody have anything in that realm that they'd like to share? Doug?
Yeah, so we're in a fairly rural cottage country type area. Our entire county has had only 7 cases and they're all resolved. So even though there was an initial time of fear, that's a very, very key area. So we made an offer to the local health services to function as a isolation respite. We're a 6-bed facility to function as isolation and respite for frontline workers, which turned out the system was underwhelmed and that wasn't needed at all. However, weather is turning lovely and we're about to get swamped with people coming up from Toronto who are quite likely to bring contagion with them. So we're expecting a wave, even though the local health unit is being adamant for people not to come to their cottages because this rural system here can't, people are ignoring that and the province isn't enforcing it. So we're expecting that we're going to see a wave of cottager-induced contagion in the area. So we're keeping the facility clean, disinfected, and completely closed. And we're not going to charge anything for that. It has been used once. We figure we're further ahead in terms of generating community goodwill by being available than relatively small per diems that we might see. Now, that would be different in Five Oaks as a larger facility. There's a significant revenue possibility there. So we're waiting. We may, if all goes really well, we won't ever have to exercise hospitality during this time.
Doug, how many can you house?
Beds for 10, but we're not going to put anyone in shared rooms. So we're capped at 6. But the scale of this community, that's the way. right now what we're doing is starting to talk to medical people around what kind of circumstances would need to exist for us to begin. But what we do is cancer support retreats. So we're trying to figure out, are we maybe a year away from where we can bring medically compromised people into community in the center? That's going to be the last group we expect who will be able to gather with others, absent some really effective screening and diagnostics that aren't yet there. So we could be looking at quite a while before we can bring people in. So we're trying to figure out, can we could have 3 self-contained, could we bring people into these little self-contained units, each have their own bedroom, their own bathroom. We're trying to figure out these options. Sorry, I'm wandering off track here.
Thanks, Doug. One of the questions that I feel like that has been rising to the surface for our group is, what is our community? So when we're talking about community partnerships, what community are we talking about? Because we've got these overlapping communities that we're connected to. So, there's our usual guests and groups. If we were talking about serving that community's needs, it would look probably a lot different than what we're talking about in terms of serving local geographic needs of people who are facing homelessness. There's also our staff community and the particular health needs of that community. So that's been a good conversation for us to have, and we've even gone through and just listed all of the communities we consider ourselves as being a part of, so that when we're talking about serving the needs of a particular one, we can really be honest and clear-eyed about the choices we're not making to serve other communities. If we're closed to retreats right now, but even after we are technically allowed to open back up, we may choose to serve a different community than the one that we have been serving for a time, based on the current context and information and needs in our community. So that's been really fruitful and important for us to talk about. Is anybody else working on any specific possibilities that they'd be willing to share about? Kitty?
We've tried a lot of different things here at Stony Point Center, and nothing has come through, but one of the things, the latest one that we're working on, we're most hopeful about, and that's with the domestic violence shelter here in our county called the Center for Safety and Change. And we actually have had a long-standing partnership with them to provide emergency housing for any of their clients on a, quiet, very, very quiet basis. And so they have come to us because the shelter that they run here in the county is full. It's 15 people, and they are seeing the need for more places. And what they are doing is applying to the state to see if their license can be expanded so that they can take more clientele if they can prove that they have a place to put them, which would be Stony Point Center. So we're waiting for them to hear back from the state and see if we can be helpful. If we can be helpful, then we still have to talk more with our staff about what that would be, and also with the National Presbyterian Church that owns us, and see if they would be willing to stretch. So I'm appreciative to hear about Michael's experience and all the different things about protocols and working with the local health department. We reached out to the local county health department, and they were not very helpful or forthcoming or transparent or anything. So we're kind of discouraged about our local health department. But the Center for Safety and Change has been around for 40 years. And if we can connect with them, that kind of a partnership, what you're talking about, Kirstin, about having them be the experts in what they're expert in, and us providing that hospitality, I'm hopeful that something will happen. It's really hard to be here at this 90-room retreat center and have it be totally not used. And I think we'll do all the protocols we can, and we have staff that are being paid with the payroll protection right now and are staying home. And I appreciated hearing Michael's conversations about staff and who's willing to actually come in and who isn't, and who's extra risk. And we'll have to really deal with that. But first, we're trying to figure out, I guess we don't want to go down that road until we have an actual possibility open to us. But I am concerned with everybody staying home across the country about people who have to stay home with their abusers. And if we can provide some help with that, then we're going to try.
I know we have a few centers on here where we've got a couple of people represented. So Kirkridge and Loretto and Lindenwood. I'm wondering if any of you, Joanne?
So Susan Clausen, who's on the call, and I work at Loretto Retreat Centers. I take care of the Nobbs Haven Center, which has 27 beds. Susan works in a place where they have 7 hermitages. And we live on the campus of the Sisters of Loretto Mother House, where the median age is 86. And because we have some really, how do I say, not necessarily cautious, but prudent people in leadership at the healthcare facility, they had only 1 case of COVID, and that was not, no one else caught it, and it's been 4 weeks. And so I want to give them a lot of credit for that. At the same time, it means they are really, really cautious about our doing anything in terms of even opening up some of the hermitage space to people. But this conversation gives me a lot of enthusiasm for what we might be able to do for the local community. If the women of Loretto like to do anything at all, it is help people. And so I'm just really excited about a conversation with the leadership tomorrow and the possibility of reaching out to a couple of local shelters. So just enormous thanks for this conversation.
Any of the other centers want to chime in?
Hi, I'm Arlene. We're in Indiana. We also, our facility, Lindenwood, which Paul is a part of, it's actually separate from the facility that we have with our independent living, where our sisters live. We have a cottage where they live. So we have multiple businesses. But we kind of took a stance early on in order to not get a sister or to try to mitigate any spread of COVID here on our campus, and pretty much shut down. And most of our retreats that were slated to be here for, say, April and May, all canceled. So now we're kind of looking into the month of June, which the state of Indiana has already started to relax a lot of its shelter from home regulations, and we're somewhat kind of gearing back up to start to accept individuals on campus. But we're creating kind of a COVID resource book for all of the co-workers in order to kind of understand, the spread, what would happen if there was a case, what would we do in terms of quarantine and things of that nature. It's interesting because hearing a lot of what Micah was doing, I was like, man, that would be so great. Why we could do something like that. But is the thought around the protection for the sisters that we have here and the age of the population that we have here, that we are just very cautious before we kind of move forward with any of those ideas. They're great. They're absolute. It's the core of kind of who the sisters are, working with the poor, working with the sick. but it is the protection factor too of not in trying to ensure that we can still take care of the sisters who are here and the residents who are here. So
if I can piggyback on Arlene, is the other thing that we don't have, like she said, we can't really bring a group in that. So what we've tried been doing for staff is we were going to buy this mailing list of churches within a 2-hour radius. We're now making our own instead of paying for it and that. And so that's one of the ways that we're utilizing our staff to put that together, and since we can't be working on something else. So developing that has been very helpful as something to keep moving forward and being prepared that when we come back and we're ready to go, we're ready for whatever may happen, and to be able to reach out to those we need to reach out to welcome them back and that. So using the time wisely.
Thank you very much. One of the things that occurred to me, and I asked Brooke to share a little bit about what they're doing, is I think as spaces of hospitality, we're all very eager to host people at our facility because that's what we're built for. But there are opportunities to serve that don't necessarily involve taking on the risk and all of the logistics of bringing people onto campus. So Brooke, would you be able to share a little bit about what you guys are doing?
What I'm doing right now is listening very intently and like scratching ideas down, being like, ah. So, I mean, the thing that we're doing that is not hospitality related is I know probably most of your areas have mutual aid networks, and that's my background is as an organizer. So I just kind of jumped into that early on, and we have a wonderful community center in our town. So a lot of that has now shifted over, but we have, I really wanted to organize the local community into teams. So we have a like emotional support team, and we have a mask making team, and Watershed's been making bone broth and freezing it. And we've been giving that out for free to whoever is sick or elderly or immunocompromised in our community. And so just looking for what the needs were. We had a tech working group that we've created a website and a Facebook page. And so that's been really wonderful for us, in part because we've engaged in our local community in different ways. My partner's from here, so we're not estranged from it, but I think we are regarded as sort of like lefty weirdos as much as we'd like not to be, but we're definitely, that's who we are. And so it's been really nice to just, be giving masks to like the right wing deli in our town and just have them be like, oh, Watershed, and just put a different face on who we are, which is not, we don't want to be regarded as, a niche. That is who we serve in the larger world, but we actually are committed to everybody in our community and are not interested in being sort of sectarian in that way at all. And so that's been lovely. And if we do nothing else, that will feel really additive. But I am trying to figure out, we do have our staff, we have some staff furloughed, some using PPP money, and zero plan for post June 15th. And what's weird is I realized that I'm high risk. And I got that confirmation from our very soft talking Caesar, who was like, yes, you should consider yourself high risk. I was like, okay, good to know. So where I would be more likely to put myself in sort of the fray, now I'm realizing I really can't. And the question of, do I feel comfortable putting my staff in a cleaning capacity that might put them at risk? I love the ideas that are being put out there. I am sort of thinking about first responders. I've been thinking about we have some, if groups want to come up and sort of like work, stay together in a facility and cook for themselves, is that a possibility? Sort of what are the ways that we can stay active in this moment? I do worry about, I hate to say this, but I'm just going to put it out there, bed bugs. In addition to COVID, that is something that's limited some of my altruistic ideas in the past. In particular, I've worked in my other life in the past a lot with homeless populations. And we've spent so much money on bed bug mitigation that is part of the equation that goes off in my brain when I think about that. And I hate that, but I feel like it is just a reality. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about this conversation. Kitty, I'd love to connect with you since we're close and figure out if there's anything that you've researched. I also am recognizing how exhausting it's been to be open, and I mentioned this before, but in a different capacity, and how much energy we can throw into reinventing ourselves. And, you know, it's one thing if we're looking at a few months, but if we are looking at a few years, because I still am having a hard time imagining how we go back to being what we were without a vaccine, which may never come. And so I'm stuck in that thought. And yeah, I'm sure many of us, I'm seeing nodding heads, are sort of stuck in that thought. And so are these sort of small things that we can do right now that are needed? Are they going to make us feel better about being empty? And it's actually like, I'm just trying to figure all of that out. Yeah, so that was nice and inspiring, I'm sure. Check.
Yeah, Doug.
One of the things we did early on, recognizing that we wouldn't be able to fulfill our usual function of bed-based hospitality, but we have capacity in our faculty. We have some very wise therapists and people with good mental health skills. And so we reached out to the local media, and we're in a pretty rural area, so that was kind of limited, but both the paper and the radio station were happy to have some of our faculty do some guest interviews around how do you take care of yourself? How do you look after your fears? How do you respond to difficult relationships when you're in a time of fear? That was a way to leverage, to pivot some of our resources. We may get called on again. It was a short-lived thing, but it was well received, and at least made us feel like we could do something with some of our resources, even when we can't use the beds at the moment.
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing if anybody else has ways that they are finding to serve during this time that doesn't involve that complexity right now of inviting people onto your campus.
This is Jean from Kirkridge. You know, listening to this conversation, I realize how much in this country the system is set up without bridges. That it's really, there's so few advocates, right? I know Justine's tried to call the local shelter and they don't seem to be answering calls, so we're not really sure what's happening and are reluctant to go down. But I'm just, I am sad. Doug and Michael, I'm so grateful for the lead of those north of the border who have the sense to have migrant workers in. And it feels so cut off and so difficult, right, to try and figure out our role. And I guess one of the things that Kirstin, I really appreciate about this call is that we're kind of thinking together. And, you know, states have different regulations and states have, you know, different understandings when they're going to be open. And I wonder about, you know, just going down this track of trying to figure out where's the wedge where we might find connection, where we might find a group of people who really need some quarantine, if we're able to do that, and how we're able to do that. I wonder about if anybody has talked to someone from a domestic shelter that maybe they know someone like in our area that we could talk to that is desperately looking. You know, how do we match up the connections of what we can offer, and not all of us can offer the same thing, but what we can offer and how we offer it. I mean, we're very fortunate at Kirkridge. Most days I don't say this about how they designed the place, but in this particular instance, we're spread all over a mountain. We have 4 separate buildings with 4 separate kitchens, with 4 separate meeting areas and physical spaces. You know, the thought of, because I know Five Oaks, what Michael did is stunning, because he's exactly right. It's how he described it. But we actually were built to keep groups separate, and so and out of each other's way. So we would be a good place. We would have the same questions that many of you have raised about, you know, staff coming in and having to clean, or, you know, high risk, and how do we do all these things? But yet we're in a rural area that had we been accepting migrant workers, we might have been a perfect place to quarantine. So I just encourage us to keep moving forward in any inroads that any of us find, or any good ideas that we have. That this is why we're a collaboration. We can actually come back together and say, well, let's serve this particular population, because this seems to be a population we didn't think of before, right? So, I mean, and I'm actually thinking, quite frankly, of if we would enter into something like this. I mean, the truth is, most of our staff, with the exception of Justine, is in their 60s and 70s. I mean, just our cleaning staff, our cooking staff, I mean, I'm sorry, we just are older. But I think it would be possible to maybe engage a cleaning service that has access to the right equipment, has access to the right cleaning supplies, that we wouldn't ask somebody who's 70 to go in and clean a room anymore. That we would ask somebody who may be in their 20s, or get a whole new staff. You know, Brooke, I'm like you. I'm in a vulnerable category, and I hate to admit it, but it's just the damn truth. So, you know, how do we do that without being exploitative? But, you know, realize that there are other services that actually have more expertise and more equipment to do the work we want to have done. So anyway, Kirstin, thanks for this conversation, and it's gotten my wheels turning, but I haven't found the inroad yet.
Yeah, thank you, Jean. And I noticed that Arlene posted some resources in the chat, so thank you for doing that. Information about cleaning.
Yeah, we're using that as kind of a guide for us to create a protocol, or to make people feel comfortable that are going to return back into a retreat setting. Here's what, you know, a room would look like, and here are the areas that we know deep cleaning is happening. And so it was something, working with our housekeeping department, that we wanted to put together. And again, we just took it from what Hilton and what some of the larger hotels were out there putting out about how they're cleaning and what they're going to do. And I've, you know, quietly called a couple of people that I know that work in hotels and saying, you know, what are you guys doing differently? You know, because, you know, their occupancy has gone down to, you know, 1% and things like that. So what are you guys going to do differently when travelers are going to come back and, you know, business starts to get running again? You know, what's going to look differently? And so this is one of those things that was shared with me, and it's a great way to at least start that. If you don't have a cleaning protocol in place, this gives you a key kind of step area to, you know, to be able to put out there to the public.
Yeah, that's great. And Jean, you talked about like sharing information about who to contact in our local areas. So I mentioned the emergency management coordinator already. So there's probably a person in your county who's in that role. And also I've had good luck talking with board members of local organizations who I know personally, because I think a lot of organizational directors and staff are just beside themselves right now, but the board members have a little bit of brain space and also some knowledge of what the organization might need. And in terms of being in partnership with local agencies who specialize in this stuff, like for example, with the question of decongregating shelters and working with our local homeless shelter, the health department has to sign off on their plan. So the health department needs to know that everybody who's going to be involved in it is trained and equipped and confident in what needs to happen. And so there's support networks and resources for that kind of thing, which I have found really encouraging and helpful. And even in terms of like, you know, one of the things that our staff was kind of stressing out about when we were talking about this possibility, because so we have one house that has 4 bedrooms. It has a landline phone. It has no TV and internet, but it at least has a phone. So we were offering that house, but we also have these 8 cabins out in the woods that in some ways are perfect because they've got their own kitchen, they've got their own full bathroom, but they have no phone, they have no TV, no internet. And you take somebody out of a crisis situation and plunk them down by themselves in a cabin in the woods. Like there are people who are not in crisis who freak out when they get in that situation, right? Mm-hmm. And I brought it to this collective and everybody was like, oh yeah, well we can, I'm sure we can find TVs with DVD players and we can put together some DVDs and puzzles and games and books. And like they had all of these ideas and we're like totally ready to pitch in and help solve that problem and keep people company. And that was just so delightful and encouraging. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, our network of retreat centers is supporting each other in this, but we can also look to our local geographic networks. And I'm surprised in what we find in terms of the sense of community and mutual support there.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Kirstin. I'm wondering what people might be doing to address some of the other issues that are starting to surface out there. So issues of food insecurity are getting a lot of press. Those are real local issues. Do we have an opportunity to share or connect people or whatever, however we might use our staffs and our resources to address some of those things that aren't right here, right this moment, but the glimmers of something to come that may not be too far down the road? And what other glimmers are you seeing?
Yeah, Kitty.
Something that's kind of just unfolded for us, and I don't know how it might apply, but a few years ago we helped support the start of immigrant rights group here in our county that's run by immigrants. And we've become really close to the leader of that. And she has really been seeing that food insecurity here in our county, especially with immigrant families who, of course, aren't eligible for any of the support that's coming from the government. And so she got wind of a food box that just disgusted her with what was available in the food box. She said, I can do better than this. So she worked with her group and they have gotten donations from supermarkets, and I don't know where else she's gotten it, but she needed a place to pack it all up. And so she has been using our large dining room with a few volunteers all masked and gloved and everybody trying to do physical distancing and spreading it out over tables. But they've been packing up stuff and we've been able to keep some of our stuff in our refrigerated walk-in. And she actually hooked up with the Salvation Army in our county, and the Salvation Army has access to really, really inexpensive government food through government warehouses of food. And so they doubled their order from some food distribution center up in Albany run by the government, and a huge tractor trailer came down and they were able to pack up 150 really solid food boxes and deliver them through Facebook, you know, through all of her networking in the county to families that really needed it. So you never know, even a place to organize food can be helpful. I don't know. And so that just kind of happened because she said, I need a space. So an empty meeting room could be helpful.
You know, Kitty, that's really interesting. That reminds me of the Beam Project that started out in Colorado. And it was for single mothers and women who couldn't get jobs, but they literally sat around a table and they each scooped the appropriate amount of whatever beans they had, and they made these bean soup concoctions with spices and everything. And that's the Bean Project is huge and widely successful. You know, I think about the resources of like the sisters, right, who are looking for a project and probably could get access to big piles of beans. That's a really interesting idea. If we could figure out how to get a bunch of beans delivered to us and to gather community people together and put them in bags and make a bunch of bean soup, because beans are not easy to find in your local grocery store. And it's a very sustaining thing. Just doing beans and rice for people could be a really interesting, or a certain kind of bean soup, right? Could be interesting. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the ideas that are coming out of this conversation. One more thing that I wanted to share that I've kind of learned through this process, as we have been talking about how to host people at GilChrist and how, like, what are all of the parameters we would need to think about in order to keep everybody safe. And, you know, those minute details that my brain gets into about, like, well, we need a boundary here, and how's this security going to work, and communication lines, and what if somebody gets sick, and bed bugs. Yes, thank you, Brooke, for bringing that up, because I need to add that to my list of questions of things that we need to have a conversation about in advance. I actually at one point realized, so this 4-bedroom house that we have with a landline phone, one of the things that our county group is talking about is the need to have housing reserved for people who are in shelter situations who show symptoms or test positive, a place for them to go. And they've been looking at, you know, empty rental units in the city. Can they rent those? Because even hotels are tricky for that sort of thing. And it actually, in an interesting way, was very liberating for me to think about dedicating that house for people who have tested positive, because it completely takes away that worry about keeping people, like, do they have it? Do they don't? How do we handle testing? Are we taking temperatures? All of that. Actually, like, dedicating that house and knowing people who are there are positive. They just need a space to wait it out. They have access to a phone. Somebody's checking on them regularly. That actually took a load off my mind. And I was thinking about that in conjunction of, like, a space like Kirkridge, where there are separate spaces that could be used for different things. Do we have isolated spaces that we can just basically turn over and say, here's the use for this now. We're not going to have anybody else in here. We're not going to have any guests. This is going to be a community of people who are supporting each other while they wait out the symptoms. So I just want to toss that out there as something that I have learned as well.
Kirstin, have you talked to the folks at the local hospital about what protocols you might have if you had a group of people and someone became critically ill and you needed to get them in quickly? How to handle that?
We haven't talked about that yet, but that is one of the things that I would be looking to the health department and the other professionals to help us make a plan for, like, all part of that plan. Yeah, because we're not too far from the local hospital, which is great.
Yeah.
Actually, we had one of the hospitals call us, and they were releasing people who were COVID positive who either didn't have a good place to go or were going back to an apartment with elderly relatives and needed that exact kind of space. They weren't sick enough to need hospitalization. They needed a place to just quarantine themselves. And then the local Department of Social Services got involved and said, oh, no, you know, we'll take care of that. And we'll test everybody. And if they qualify for our, you know, if their income is low enough, we will pay for them to go to hotels. And if their income is not low enough, well, then they can pay to go places. I mean, it was sort of like they cut in. And so the hospital said, oh, I guess I have to follow this protocol over here. And we wrote an email trying to say, well, what if the people don't qualify, their income is not low enough, but they don't have enough money to go pay to be in a hotel for 2 weeks? And we didn't get any response. So that kind of partnership got cut off. And I really worry about those folks, right, who don't have the income low enough. And, you know, what are their options? And the hospital was trying to look out for them and figure this out. And then it kind of got cut off. So I hope you can figure it out.
Yeah. I think I saw Brooke and Michelle had things to offer.
I think the one thing that just comes to mind is the question of do no harm. Obviously, as retreat centers, we're used to, you know, being the yummiest place that changes people's view of what's possible in humanity and blah, 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 which is, I love playing that role and just knowing that that aspect of what we do can remain intact with whatever we put forth. And it's so hard to do that when you're like you stay over there and I'll stay over here and I'm going to put your, you know, like, and to have the fear that I would have potentially about doing something new, about doing something that's potentially going to be harmful to me or to one of my staff, and to at the same time show the same level like of love and care, and is hard. And it's just something that, you know, I think as we move forward, I'd love to hear more about how people manage to do that as well, while we're thinking about sort of the mechanics of what we can offer. How do we offer them in the spirit that we offer other things?
Yeah, I feel like, thank you very much, Brooke. I feel like I would love to have another conversation around this topic at some point in the future. So maybe we could do another Tuesday afternoon conversation at some point. And I also want, Ben, if you can share the link in the chat for the, we have a collaborative spreadsheet, Google spreadsheet going, where I'm really strongly encouraging folks to, even if it's just a tiny possibility that you're working on and you don't even know if it's going to be anything yet, add it to that spreadsheet with your contact information, so that if other people have resources or input to share, or you know, you're looking for advice from someone, or you need a place to go to get the wheels turning, or you need to show it to a board of directors to say like, hey, we're not the only ones who are considering these crazy ideas, you know, whatever it is. This for now is our repository of ideas and action and things that we're working on. And yeah, just stay in touch with Ben and the rest of the collaboration, so that we can see if there's another like theme of questions or desire to have a conversation bubbling up. Because yeah, I think these are crucial questions of identity and survival and mutual support and mission, and we're all being stretched right now in some really hard ways and some really good ways. And Ben, was there anything else? Oh, you posted the information in the chat. Do you want to talk about what's coming up?
I think most of you have these invites already, but just so you know, we finalized the facilitator for next week. So Teresa will be facilitating about grief and trauma. So that'll be more of a heart-centered process where we'll actually be doing some of that together. And then the following Tuesday, Mark Piper from Senecal Center, who's been on many of these calls, is going to be looking at policies with us. He's got a lot of really good stuff prepared, and I'm hoping that we can focus it a little bit on COVID, but there are a lot of other policies that we can work on there too. So that's almost like this conversation. It's a little too big for one call, but we're going to get into some of that on the 19th as well.
Great, thank you, Ben. And I just want to close us out with something, a simple practice that I'm sure many of you have done for a long time, and maybe especially now, but I have been finding this so helpful. Somebody posted it on Facebook and it reminded me of it. So I'll just invite you to close your eyes and just find an easy, normal pattern of breathing. And then I want you to do 3 things. First, Lower your shoulders away from your ears. Relax your shoulders. And I want you to unclench your jaw. And then drop your tongue away from the roof of your mouth. And just sit there and take 3 deep breaths. I don't know about you, but I need to do that about 20 times a day. Thank you so much for joining the conversation, and I really look forward to hearing the next chapter of all of these stories. Peace be with you.
Thank you. Thank you for facilitating. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Mm.
Hang in there, everybody.
Yes.
This is excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.